Kieran, I want to bring in Jim Kennedy. Now, Jim, you were former communications for News Corp, but you have a long history of working in Washington, D.C., starting at the Capitol, the Clinton White House, and then right through to the Gore campaign. And so you have a wealth of knowledge, and we love hearing what you have to say about history as well, because you know so much about US history.
Sure, thanks.
What are we thinking is going to happen tonight that could be about to make history?
Well, we're at that stage right now during the day when it reminds me of a famous saying about Hollywood where nobody knows anything. I think it was Bob Evans who said that. And we're at that nobody knows anything for sure stage because it's a little too early to see what's happening on the ground. So people are kind of wildly speculating. That's all we have to go on. There's some early vote data, but it's hard to be too conclusive about that. But soon enough, actual returns are going to start coming in, and we're going to see patterns emerge fairly early, I think, because you're going to have 2 points of comparison. 2020 and 2016. So there's a wealth of past data to analyze in terms of what's happening now.
So when we talk about the past data, 2020 was so unusual with COVID. People were voting earlier, and more Democrats were voting earlier than we're seeing now. Republicans are coming in to vote early. Yes. How much can we rely on the data from 2020?
Not too much, because it was an anomalous year. So yes, you are seeing better Republican early voting data, but that may be a factor of a unique factor which is not going to be repeated. And Democrats may show up on election day to counter that. So we can't take too much stock in that. I think the early exit polls may be more revelatory in that regard. And of course, the actual numbers coming in starting at 7 o'clock when some of the states close, you're going to be able to see some trends perhaps emerging.
So when we're looking at exit polls, what are you looking for?
Well, I think some of the most important factors are gender gap among men and women, because both of those could affect the outcome. You'll also see turnout and attitude among African American and Hispanic voters. There's been talk about some migration of votes to the Republican side in terms of those votes. And if we start to see that, that could be meaningful or not, depending on what the results are. So I think gender gap and how Hispanic and African American turnout and views are going to be significant.
And if we talk about Pennsylvania specifically, because it really seems like there's no path to victory for Kamala Harris without Pennsylvania, one of the critical issues there is now going to be the Hispanic vote, because we've been told the joke about Puerto Ricans has enlivened some voters who were upset about that joke being made at Madison Square Garden, but also those kind of traditional blue-collar workers, the ones that didn't come out for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Do you think there's a risk that they will sit this election out again?
That's interesting. You know, orange is the new black and Pennsylvania is the new Florida.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the real battleground here. And you're going to look for two trends, like how are Hispanic votes happening in Pennsylvania, both whether it's related to the Madison Square Garden. I'm not sure that's necessarily going to happen. But also in the rural areas, what's turnout going to be like? There could be a hidden vote for both Harris and for Trump. So which one has the bigger hidden vote?
And do you think there's a propensity for the turnout to actually be lower, and that fewer people have come out today? More people were early voting and some are simply just not voting at all?
Most people view the turnout's going to be lower than it was in 2020 because of the unique circumstances of the COVID year. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's more akin to 2016. But again, the actual number of people that are voting could be, if it's too low or much lower, it could be helpful to the Democrats. If it's higher, it depends on who's surging. If it's women surging for Harris, that's good for her. If it's young men or Hispanic men surging for Trump, that's good for him.
And Kieran, that's a lot of what we saw are happening on the polls when we were there talking to people who were casting their ballots early. Many of them did want to make sure that they had that opportunity to vote, so they were there early. But long lines really dissuade a lot of people, and mail-in voting is tricky in some states, so it could all impact it as well.
Annalisa, I just want to ask Jim a question about Trump himself. Jim, this is the first time the GOP has nominated the same candidate in 3 consecutive elections. This is such a momentous day for so many reasons, not the least of which it really does dictate Trump's place in history. Does he become the great legend of the Republican Party, or do they need to move on from MAGA after election 2024, Jim?
Well, both parties are undergoing a transformation, and I think Trump has certainly signified a major change in the Republican Party. They used to be the party of the wealthy, of the country club set, and he has kind of moved them in the direction of the working class, probably to the benefit of the party. And Democrats used to be more known as the working class party, and now they're more sort of the laptop set or the elites, and so they moved in that direction. So that could be problematic for them as well. So I think both parties are undergoing a transformation, and the impact of this election is going to really resound in the years ahead.